Friends of Islam, this time the Islamic faith is back before you to share Islamic information. I hope it inspires your activities today, and don't forget to click the subscribe button and activate the bell button notifications so you don't miss the latest news from the Islamic Faith channel. Amidst the resurgence of Islam in America, a profound phenomenon is quietly unfolding. A wave of conversion is beginning to be felt across the country. More and more people are opening their hearts and accepting Islam as a way of life. This is not just for ordinary citizens, but also for influential figures once known for their steadfast adherence to their old beliefs. Report after report indicates that at least 8 churches have been forced to close their doors due to dwindling congregations. Meanwhile, thousands of pastors and priests have chosen to embrace Islam after a long search for truth. For them, this is not simply a change of religion, but a spiritual journey that brings peace of mind and answers to their deepest questions. This phenomenon is proof that the light of guidance can come at any time, to anyone, even in unexpected places. This wave continues to grow, not by force, not by propaganda, but by the power of guidance that touches the heart. In America, a land once considered difficult to accept Islam is now slowly bearing witness to the undying revival of the Muslim community. Many of them begin this journey with doubt. They studied, compared, read the Quran in silence without the knowledge of their congregation. But the more they studied, the clearer it became that Islam carries the pure teachings of monotheism, without mixture, without compromise. Eli was silent as a pastor who had spent decades studying the Bible. He knew that there had been much debate throughout history about how the sacred texts had changed over time. But to find something like this, a verse from an Islamic source that confirmed that allegation, was something else entirely. If this is true, Elijah's voice was barely a whisper, this will shake everything. That's why I came here, Sheikh Abdul Rahman replied. I don't want this to be just an academic study. I want to have a dialogue with people who seek the truth. Eli looked at the cleric before him. He could sense the sincerity in the man's words. But he also knew that if this got out, the reaction from the Christian world, especially in America, would not be simple. Do you realize how dangerous this could be for you? Elijah asked seriously. Sheikh Abdul Rahman smiled faintly. The truth always carries risks. Elijah took a deep breath. He knew that what lay before him was more than just intellectual discourse, but a turning point in a spiritual journey that could change the lives of many, including his own. And he wasn't ready to face the consequences of the truth he had just discovered. That morning, the sun had just risen from behind New York's skyscrapers, creating an orange hue across the sky. The autumn air was cool, and a gentle breeze carried the distinctive aroma of this city that never sleeps. But there was something different about St. Peter's Church that day. In the courtyard, a crowd had begun to gather. Some carried placards with protest messages. Others had come simply to see what was happening. The media had also arrived, their cameras ready to cover what they believed would be a major story. Amidst the excitement and tension, this was a day he knew would change the world, not just for him, but perhaps for many in America. Beside him, Sheikh Abdul Rahman stood quietly. He wore his white robe, a green turban wrapped around his head, and in his hand, he carried the ancient manuscript that had been at the center of all this. Elijah stepped forward, standing on the steps of the church and raising his hand to quiet the crowd. Brothers, his voice echoed in the crisp morning air. Today we are not gathered here to fight or spread hatred. We are here to seek the truth. The crowd began to quiet. Some still held their placards tightly, but they listened. Elijah continued. Many of us grew up believing that what we know is the only truth. But what if there is something hidden from us? What if there is a part of history we have overlooked? And what if today we are given the opportunity to discover greater answers? He turned to Sheikh Abdul Rahman, motioning for him to come forward. The cleric stepped forward, his face calm. His eyes swept over the faces that stared at him with curiosity and some with suspicion. I have not come to this land to convert anyone, Abdullah said with a steady voice. I come with a discovery that may raise questions and may also change the way you see the world. He opened the manuscript, tracing the pages that were hundreds of years old. Then in a calm voice, he read the verse he had found. The language was so beautiful, so profound. The few who understood Arabic looked shocked. They whispered to each other, trying to grasp the meaning of the words they had just heard. Then Sheikh Abdurrahman translated the verse into English. And those who had been given the book before knew this truth, but some of them hid it for worldly gain. But for those who seek with a pure heart, the truth will be found. For God will not let his light be extinguished. Silence. Some people looked at each other with puzzled expressions. This verse did not sound unfamiliar, but it was also not in the Quran they had always known. A man in the crowd, dressed in a suit and tie like an intellectual, raised his hand. "What do you mean? Are you saying that our holy book has been changed?" Sheikh Abdul Rahman looked at the man gently. "I have not come to accuse or condemn. I am simply pointing out that in history many things change, whether intentionally or not. And our task is not to attack each other, but to seek the truth." A woman with a cross around her neck looked hesitant. Sebator finally asked, "If this is true, why was it only discovered now?" Elijah, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "Maybe it's because we're only now ready to discover it," he said softly. The atmosphere grew tense as several people began shouting their disapproval. "This is Islamic propaganda," someone shouted in the back. "They want us to abandon our faith." But to everyone's surprise, several priests from other churches seemed to be listening intently. One of them, a man in his 50s with a short beard and a face that reflected wisdom, stepped forward. "I want to read the manuscript," he said. Sheikh Abdul Rahman handed him the old book. The man flipped through the pages carefully. His eyes widened as he read more deeply. "I recognize some of this text," he said hoarsely. "This is similar to some texts I've studied in church history, but there's a part that's different. It explains something that until now has only been speculation." Slowly, the atmosphere began to change. Several priests who had initially come simply to listen began discussing among themselves. And then something surprising happened. One of the younger priests, tears in his eyes, knelt in front of the church. "I've been searching for the truth all my life," he said in a trembling voice, "and now I found it." Several other priests began to move, looking at each other with a mixture of doubt and conviction. They had spent their lives teaching something, and now they were faced with something that might change everything. A felt his heart beat faster. He hadn't expected it to happen so soon. Sheikh Abdul Rahman raised his hand. "My brothers," he said in a gentle voice, "Islam did not come to erase your faith. Islam came to complete it. God is one, and he always guides those who sincerely seek him." One by one, the priests began to come forward, some with tears in their eyes, others with faces still clouded with doubt. But one thing was for sure, they had taken the first step toward a truth that had been hidden for so long. Amidst the clamor of voices in the churchyard, a journalist recording the entire affair whispered something to his colleague. "This isn't just news, it's history." The atmosphere in St. Peter's churchyard grew tense. The priest who had arrived with trepidation now stood in confusion. Their hearts were in turmoil after hearing what Sheikh Abdurrahman had just revealed. Some were still struggling with conflicting thoughts. Others were slowly beginning to accept that something big was happening. Eli Carter felt his heartbeat quicken. He saw several of his fellow pastors staring at him as if waiting for a signal. He was a respected figure in the church community, and his decision would have significant repercussions. But within himself, a struggle of equal magnitude was brewing. A senior pastor, Father Gregory Williams, stepped forward. He was known as a conservative figure who had been vocally opposed to all forms of Islam spreading in America. His face still showing shock, he stared intently at Eli and Sheikh Abdurrahman. "Eli," his voice trembled, "do you truly believe that what this man says is the truth?" Eli looked at Gregory with eyes full of conviction, yet also tenderness. "I cannot close my eyes to something so obvious," he replied quietly. "I have read, I have studied, and I have felt its truth in my heart." Gregory took a long, hard look, turning to the ancient manuscript held by one of the others. His hands clenched at his sides. Then he said, "If this is true, if there is a part of the truth that we have been ignoring, then we cannot escape the reality." The crowd began to roar. Some of the churchgoers present appeared confused. Some even began arguing with each other. Journalists covering the event were busy sending their reports to the news agency. Suddenly, a man from behind shouted, "This is an insult to the church. We cannot allow this to happen." Some nodded in agreement. Others looked more curious than angry. Sheikh Abdul Rahman remained calm. He knew that the truth is often difficult to accept at first. He stepped forward and spoke in a steady voice. "I have not come to judge or coerce anyone. I simply want to invite you to think about what may have been lost in our history." Silence fell again. No one knew how to react to this situation. But then something unexpected happened. A young priest, perhaps around 30, suddenly walked forward. He looked at Eli and then turned to Sheikh Abdul Rahman. "I have struggled with questions about God for years," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I sensed something was missing, something incomplete in my understanding of faith." He took a deep breath and then, with a trembling voice, said, "I believe." The entire churchyard fell silent. Some covered their mouths with their hands in disbelief at what they had just heard. The other priests looked at each other, some in shock, others in profound understanding. Elijah felt his chest tighten with mixed emotions. He never imagined this would happen before his very eyes. Sheikh Abdul Rahman looked at the young man gently. "Are you sure of your decision?" he asked. The young priest nodded firmly. "I have been searching for answers all my life, and I feel like I have finally found them." In a calm yet confident voice, Sheikh Abdul Rahman guided him in reciting the Shahada. "There is no God but Allah and no prophet of Allah." The young priest repeated each word clearly, and as the last word left his lips, tears streamed down his cheeks. He covered his face with his hands, feeling something he had never felt before. An overwhelming sense of calm. The crowd erupted again. Some began to cry, either from emotion or shock. Others who remained where they were seemed deep in thought, as if wrestling with their own hearts and minds. Gregory Williams, who had been standing silently, finally spoke again. "If we truly seek God," he said hoarsely, "then we must not fear the truth." He stepped forward, looked meaningfully at Elijah and said, "Guide me too." Elijah was surprised, but then smiled. He knew that Gregory was someone who had always been very strong in his faith. If this man chose to take this step, it would be something truly meaningful. Within minutes, one by one, other pastors began to come forward. Some immediately asked to take the Shahada. Others wanted to discuss it further. But one thing was certain: a wave of change had begun. Among the crowd, a reporter approached his colleague and said solemnly, "This isn't just news. This will be history." Eli looked around, his eyes glistening with tears, realizing that what had just happened was extraordinary. But he also knew that after this, many challenges awaited them, and that the world, especially America, would never be the same again. News of the pastors converting to Islam spread quickly, faster than Elijah Carter could have ever imagined. Within hours, social media was filled with videos capturing the touching moments as each priest recited the creed. Some videos showed their faces streaming with tears. Others captured the stunned congregation watching their spiritual leaders make a major decision that shook their faith. The incident sparked heated debate on various news outlets. Some conservative media outlets called it a betrayal of the church. Others saw it as a spiritual phenomenon worthy of deeper study. Various sources, from academics to religious leaders to politicians, were called in to offer their opinions. Amidst all this commotion, Elijah Carter sat in the living room of his modest Brooklyn apartment. He stared at his phone, which was constantly vibrating with notifications. Some messages were from colleagues at church. Some were angry, some confused. There were also messages from family, from congregants who used to listen to his sermons, and even from people he didn't know, expressing support or condemnation. A knock on the door startled him. He got up and opened it, finding Sheikh Abdul Rahman standing there, his face impassive. "May I come in?" the cleric asked softly. Elijah nodded, making way. Once the door closed, he took a deep breath. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," he said honestly. Sheikh Abdul Rahman smiled faintly. "The truth often comes with severe trials." Elijah rubbed his face, trying to organize his thoughts. "I never imagined it would be this big. I just wanted to find the truth. But now it feels like the whole world is watching me." Sheikh Abdul Rahman sat on the couch, gazing at Elijah with understanding. Everyone who finds the light will inevitably face challenges. Even prophets are tested when they bring the message of truth. Eli chuckled, but his tone was bitter. I'm no prophet, of course not. Sheikh Abdul Rahman nodded. But you are someone who has wielded great influence, someone who has discovered something that has changed his life. And now many see you as a symbol of that change. Eli remained silent, knowing the scholar was right. From childhood, he had been taught to stand firm in his beliefs, but now he was at a crossroads where the steps he had taken would take him in an entirely new direction. Another knock sounded at the door, louder than before. Elijah and Sheikh Abdul Rahman exchanged glances before Elijah rose to open the door. At the door stood three men in dark suits. Their faces were serious and expressionless. One of them flashed an FBI badge, Elijah Carter. Elijah nodded. I'm Agent Richardson of the FBI. We need to speak with you. Inside the brightly lit interrogation room, Elijah sat across from two agents who stared intently at him. They had asked him various questions. How did he come to be involved in the meeting with Sheikh Abdul Rahman? How did he come to the decision to convert? And was there any influence from any particular group that prompted him? Pastor Carter, Egan Richardson said, finally, his voice calm but wary. You understand why this caught our attention. Eli looked at him calmly. I didn't commit a crime. I just followed my conscience. The other agent, a large man with short, neat hair, leaned forward. This isn't just about you, Past. This is about the impact of your decision. Thousands of people watch you, follow you, and now there's a major movement that could change the religious landscape in America. It's worrying a lot of people. Elijah sighed. I'm not leading any movement. I'm just seeking the truth. Egan Richardson put his hands on the table. We've received reports that several churches in various states are experiencing unrest because their congregations are beginning to question the teachings they've received. Several other pastors are also beginning to express interest in Islam. Are you absolutely sure this is just a coincidence? Eli fell silent. He knew that what had happened was no mere coincidence. She is something bigger than himself, something that has been suppressed for so long, but has now found its way out. Agent Richardson continued, his voice a little softer. Listen, Carter, we don't want to make this harder for you, but we have to make sure this isn't part of a larger agenda. Elijah looked the agent straight in the eye. An agenda, you know what I mean? Elijah shook his head. There's no agenda, no hidden agenda. This isn't a conspiracy. This is a search for the truth, and I'm not the only one who's found it. Agent Richardson took a deep breath before finally closing the file in front of him. Okay, you can go for now, but we'll keep an eye on you. That night, Elijah returned to his apartment with mixed feelings. He knew that his journey had just begun, and that greater trials might still await him. In his room, he sat at the table, opening the Quran that Sheikh Abdul Rahman had given him. His finger traced the pages of the Holy Book before finally stopping on a verse that caught his attention. They wanted to extinguish God's light with their words. The world was changing out there, and she had unwittingly become part of it. That morning, Ela Carter woke up with a heavy feeling in her chest. Since the events at the church and the FBI interrogation, her life had changed drastically. She could no longer walk outside without attracting attention. People stared at her, some with respect, others with hatred. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, former church members, even pastors from across the country wanted to speak with her. Outside her apartment, a small group of protesters stood holding signs that read, "Traitor to the Church," and "America doesn't need Islam." Some shouted insults, while others simply stood there, their faces filled with anger. Elijah watched them from the window with mixed emotions. He knew the consequences of his decision, but he never imagined they would be this severe. Suddenly, his phone rang again. This time, the name that flashed on the screen startled him, Pastor Daniel Thompson. Daniel was an old friend, one of the people he respected most in the church. He was a man known for his steadfast faith, and over the years they had shared many discussions about God and spirituality. But since this momentous event, Daniel hadn't contacted him once. With some hesitation, Eli picked up the phone. "Eli!" Daniel's voice sounded hoarse, as if he were carrying a heavy burden. "Daniel, I didn't expect you to call." There was a pause before Daniel finally said, "I need to see you. We need to talk." An hour later, they met in a small park on the outskirts of town. It was quiet, far from the media spotlight and the crowd that constantly followed Elijah. Daniel stood with his hands in his pockets. His face showed exhaustion and confusion. As Elijah approached, he said, "I can't believe this." Elijah took a deep breath. "I understand. I never imagined it would happen like this either." Daniel stared at him intently. "What happened to you, Eli? What exactly did you discover that made you abandon everything we believed in together?" Ela paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't abandon my search for God, Daniel. I found it deeper than I ever imagined." Daniel shook his head in frustration. "But Islam, how can you believe in something we've always considered contradictory to our faith?" Elijah looked at his friend earnestly. "Because I read Daniel, I searched, I questioned everything we've ever learned, and I found a truth I could no longer ignore." Daniel fell silent. He lowered his head and said in a softer voice, "I read Elijah too." Elijah raised his eyebrows in surprise. What do you mean?" he said for a long moment before finally looking up, with eyes full of turmoil. "Since all this happened, I can't stop thinking. I want to prove you wrong, so I do it myself. I open books I've never touched before. I try to understand what you see." He pauses as if he's struggling with himself before finally whispering, "And I start." Elijah felt his heart pounding. "Daniel, are you?" Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, then said in a voice full of emotion, "I don't know if I'm ready to take the same step as you, but I can no longer deny that there's something true in the teachings we've been rejecting." Eli smiled slightly. He knew how hard it was for Daniel to admit this. "You're not alone, Daniel. Many of us feel the same way. It took me time to accept it all." Daniel looked up at the sky as if searching for answers among the slowly moving clouds. "What should we do, Eli? Do you know what will happen if more people start questioning the teachings we believed in?" Elijah nodded. He realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. This was a wave of change that couldn't be stopped. "I don't know what will happen next," Eli said. "I finally know one thing, Daniel. The truth will find its way." That very day, Daniel decided to meet with Sheikh Abdul Rahman. Their conversation lasted for hours, filled with questions, discussions, and deep reflection. Elsewhere, the situation was heating up. Churches in America were beginning to split. Some strongly condemned this event. Others began to open themselves to understanding more. Protests grew, but so did the number of people curious and wanting to know more about Islam. Some conservative religious leaders began calling for resistance, calling this phenomenon a threat to Christianity in America. Held an emergency meeting discussing how they could stem this growing tide. Meanwhile, the media continued to dig into the story. Interviews with pastors who had converted to Islam began to emerge, and each story had a profound impact on the community. Some found the courage to question their own beliefs, while others became more determined in their opposition to Islam. Amidst all this chaos, Elijah received an email from someone he didn't know. The subject line was brief: "I want to know more." Eli opened the email and read it. "I'm a pastor at a small church in Texas. I've been following everything that's been happening lately. I can't stop thinking about everything you've said. I feel like there's something I've been hiding from myself, something I need to know more about. Can we talk?" Eli stared at his phone screen. His heart pounded. This wave wasn't over. It was just beginning. Eli Carter sat at his wooden desk, the dim light illuminating his exhausted face. The last few days had changed his entire life, plunging him into a whirlpool of events he never imagined. His mind was still preoccupied with his conversation with Daniel, the email he had just received, and the ongoing protest outside his apartment. Outside, rain had begun to fall gently, its drops tapping against the window like a soft, soothing melody. But the calm was only external. Inside, a storm was raging. He reopened the email he had received a few hours earlier from the pastor in Texas. The words lingered in his mind, as if calling him to action. It was clear that he wasn't the only one questioning his faith. not the only one feeling there was something bigger than he had believed. Elijah took a deep breath and began typing a reply. "Thank you for contacting me. I understand how you feel because I've been there too. I'm willing to talk to you when you're ready." No pressure, just an honest conversation. He reread the message several times before finally sending it. As soon as he hit send, his phone suddenly rang. The name flashing on the screen made his chest feel heavy. Had Elijah's father stared at the screen for a few seconds before finally swiping the green button and picking up the call. Elijah, the voice on the other end, was deep and firm, a voice he'd known his whole life. "Father," he replied cautiously. There was a pause before the voice returned. "What are you doing? What are you thinking? Have you really thrown everything away?" Eli closed his eyes for a moment. He'd prepared himself for this conversation, but that didn't make it any easier. "Father, I didn't throw anything away. I just discovered something I'd never seen clearly." His father's voice rose with anger. "You've abandoned your family's legacy? You've tarnished our name? Do you know how your mother felt when she saw all this on the news? How your family felt?" Eli took a deep breath. "I know this is hard for you. I don't want to hurt anyone. But Father, this is the path I've found after a long search. I can't pretend I don't see it." His father fell silent. When he spoke again, his voice was lower but cold. "So you chose this over your family?" He bit his lip. "Father, this isn't about choosing one or the other. I'm still your son. I still love all of you. But you're no longer one of us," his father said sharply. "If you stick to this decision, you'll never come back." And with that, the call ended. Elijah stared at his phone, his hands trembling. He had lost his family. The rain outside grew heavier, as if reflecting his deepening feelings. The next day, news about Elijah spread even further. One national news channel aired a panel discussion about the phenomenon of pastors converting to Islam, and Elijah Carter's name was mentioned repeatedly as a key figure in the wave. "Is this a sign of Islamic infiltration into Christian institutions in America?" a host asked pointedly. "We have to view this as a serious threat," replied a political analyst, "not just because of their conversion, but because of the social impact it has had. This is disrupting our religious fabric and, if left unchecked, could lead to even greater divisions." Elijah turned off the television. He wasn't surprised. He knew this was coming. But what made him wonder was how far they would go to stop this. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. "We know where you live. You better be careful." Eli's heart was pounding. The threat was no longer implicit. The danger was real now. He took a deep breath and tried to think clearly. He wouldn't back down. No matter what, he would keep walking the path he had chosen. But he also knew this silence was temporary. The real storm was yet to come. Elijah sat on the worn couch in his apartment, staring at his phone, which still displayed the threatening message. His fists clenched not out of fear, but because he knew this was only the beginning. Ever since he had recited his Shahada in front of the church, his life had changed in ways he never expected. Not only had his family and church abandoned him, but now there was a real threat to his safety. The television in the corner of the room was still on, showing news clips that continued to discuss the shocking phenomenon of pastors converting. His face, often appearing on the screen, symbolized what some considered a grave threat to American Christianity. Elijah knew he couldn't remain silent. He picked up his phone and opened Daniel's contact. After a few seconds of hesitation, he typed a quick message. "We need to talk. This is getting worse." The reply came almost immediately. "Meet at the usual spot in an hour." The rain had stopped when Elijah emerged from his apartment, but the air still held a dampness. He lowered his hat slightly to obscure his face, hoping not to draw attention to himself. The demonstration outside his apartment had died down, but he could feel the atmosphere was more tense. A few familiar faces were still there, people who shouted hate at him almost every day. He quickened his pace toward the subway, feeling like every eye on him could be a threat. Once inside the car, he sat in a corner and took a deep breath. His thoughts returned to his father. His last words still echoed in his head. "If you stick with this decision, never go back." He knew that this decision would not only change his life, but also destroy every relationship he had ever built. But he also knew that what he was doing was the truth he could not deny. When the train reached its destination, Elijah stepped out and walked to the small cafe on the corner. This was the place where he met Daniel, one of the few places that still made him feel safe. As soon as he entered, he saw Daniel sitting in the corner, his hand clutching a steaming cup of coffee. His face looked more tired than the last time they'd seen each other. "Eli," Daniel said as he sat across from him. "What happened?" Eli slid his phone onto the table, revealing the threatening message he'd received. Daniel read it with a clenched jaw. "This is getting crazy," he said quietly. "Whoever sent this, they're serious." Elijah nodded. "I know, and I know this isn't just about me. There are many others who are starting to question everything and could become targets too." Daniel bit his lip, thoughtful. "I've talked to several people who feel the same way I do, Elijah. They're afraid. Some of them want to learn more about the consequences." Elijah gave him a sharp look. "How many people are you talking about?" Daniel met his eyes. "At least 10 pastors in various states. They're not ready to speak openly, but they know there's something wrong with what we believe." Eli paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "If this is true, then what's happening isn't just a small phenomenon. It's a movement. We have to help them," Elijah said. "Ultimately, we have to give them space to learn without fear of consequences." Daniel smiled wryly. "And how do you intend to do that? You've become a target yourself. Those people won't stay silent." Elijah took a deep breath. "I don't know, Daniel, but I can't just stand by and let this slide." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand. I feel the same way." Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Second, the man reflexively turned his head. A tall, well-built man entered the cafe wearing a long black jacket. At first glance, he looked like a regular customer. But when his eyes met Elijah's, there was something in his gaze that set off alarm bells in Elijah's head. Daniel seemed to feel the same way. He tightened his body slightly warily. The man walked slowly toward their table and stopped right in front of them. "Elijah Carter." Elijah stiffened. "Yes." The man pulled something from his pocket, a thick brown envelope. He placed it on the table and spoke in a flat tone. "You need to read this." Elijah eyed the envelope suspiciously, but before he could ask further, the man had turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving them confused. Daniel stared at Eli. "What is this?" Elijah grabbed the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside were several sheets of paper and a small handwritten note. "You must know what is happening. They are not just after you. They are after others who believe in their faith. Open your eyes before it is too late." Elijah stared at the papers in his hand, news that seemed to have never been connected. It spoke of religious leaders who mysteriously disappeared after showing interest in Islam. There were also documents that appeared to be from government agencies, indicating that there was intense surveillance of certain individuals. Daniel read the sheets with a serious expression. This was not just a simple threat. This was systematic. Ilya gritted his teeth. They would do anything to stop this. Daniel looked at him with a tense expression. "So what are we going to do now?" Eli stared out the window, watching the crowd walk by, unaware of the magnitude of the storm that was gathering behind the scenes. "I don't know," he said finally, "but we must be prepared because this is only the beginning." That morning, Elijah woke up feeling heavier than before. Even though the rain had let up last night, the anxiety within him still overwhelmed his mind and heart. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly out the window. The outside world seemed so far away, as if an invisible wall separated him from everything around him. His phone vibrated. A message had come from Daniel. "This afternoon's meeting, I discovered something." Eli took a deep breath, feeling the tension coursing through his blood. He had known since their encounter at the cafe yesterday that they had touched on something far greater than mere personal religious struggles. There was something much deeper that was now beginning to unfold, and it had nothing to do with him or their group alone. He grabbed his jacket and headed out to the place they had agreed to meet. Each step felt like a heavy burden, but he knew he couldn't back down. The world might see him as a traitor, but he felt closer to the truth than ever. When he arrived at the cafe, Daniel was waiting at a corner table. Looking more anxious than before, he immediately sensed the tension in the air. "What's wrong?" Elijah asked. Watching Daniel's expression grow serious, Daniel opened his bag and pulled out several documents. "I discovered something shocking. This may be part of the reason we're being targeted." Eli took the documents and began to read them carefully. What they revealed made his heart race. The documents contained information about an organization that had long operated behind the scenes to monitor and control the growing religious movements in America. This organization seemed to wield far more influence than they had imagined, including the involvement of several high-ranking officials who should not be involved in religious affairs. "So this isn't just about us or Islam," Elijah said slowly. His eyes widened. "It's bigger than that." Daniel nodded. "I'm sure this is why so many people are secretly questioning their faith, but are afraid to speak out. They fear that if they reveal what they've discovered, they'll be targeted. And I think we're already on their radar." Elijah felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. What they were facing now was not just a difference of faith, but a much larger and more dangerous conspiracy. A system that seeks to maintain absolute control over all things related to religion and belief. "What do we do now?" Elijah asked. His voice trembled, though he tried to hide it. Daniel paused for a moment, as if trying to think of the best course of action. "I think we need to find more evidence, more concrete evidence. We can't just rely on this document. We need to know who's behind this organization and what they're planning." Elijah looked at his friend determinedly. "We can't back down. Too many people have already fallen for this lie. I want to help them. Daniel, I want to open their eyes before it's too late." But even as that passion burned within him, something held him back. Fear for their safety, fear of a greater threat. It all played out clearly in his mind. They were already on a dangerous path, and every step they took could be their last. However, something inside him was also starting to feel a deep fear. Friends of the Islamic faith who are blessed by Allah, I hope this video is useful, and see you in our next video.